Larry, there on the first here. We'll probably do it tomorrow. Can you decide on U or W?
So,
Ready to roll? Yeah.
okay.
I'd like to call the March 19th pre-council meeting to order. The Honorable Mayor Bob Odenkirk presiding.
Hey, Jen.
Begin with roll call. Mayor Odenkirk.
Here.
Councilman Dickinson.
Here.
Councilwoman Gavin.
Here.
Councilman Girl.
Here.
Councilman Hug.
Here.
Councilman Morris.
Here.
Councilman Mudrin.
Here.
Councilwoman Coleman. Here. Councilman Turk.
Here.
First on the agenda is a presentation, the Chicago Street Corridor Redesign, New City Square by Ginkgo Planning and Design.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Mike Schwartz, Planning Director for the city. I just want to briefly introduce the project team of Perry and Zarin from Ginkgo Planning and Design. As you know, about a year ago, we kicked off this project through a grant that the city received through the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. It was an LTA, or a Local Technical Assistance Grant, and it was to come up with a conceptual design for Chicago Street corridor from Ruby Street to Washington Street, as well as a conceptual design for the new square across from the Rialto Theater. So with that, turn it over to the consultants to give you a brief preview.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We are so delighted to be here after a year. A lot has happened, and we are so excited that the project is starting to wrap up. As Mike mentioned, I'm Farhad Zareen. I'm the principal of Ginkgo Planning and Design. We're the lead consultant for the project. We've been carrying a quite a large team of landscape architects, engineers, transportation planners in the project. So we are very delighted to come to you. We are starting to wrap up the project to show you where we are today, and hopefully you'll get very excited, and we have some exciting next steps coming. As Mike mentioned, just to remind you all the scope of the project, we are looking at Chicago Street going all the way from Washington and Jefferson all the way to Ruby Street, looking at how to make that street, it's a beautiful street, how to bring back some amazing streetscape ideas. And a key part of this project is, of course, the square right across from Rialto. And when we started this project with all of you, with staff, we identified 3 very simple goals, that this wasn't just a beautification project with all the amazing things that are happening in downtown. It's wonderful to see it's so much demo happening already. We wanted to reposition the street and the square to be something that's nationally known, that visitors would come here, not only Route 66, but other people just to come and visit beautiful Joliet and come and enjoy the square. And of course, we want the street to be vibrant, very unique. But more importantly, we saw both of these projects as being an amazing economic engine for downtown Joliet. Just a quick preview of what we've been doing in the last year. We've had quite a lot of meetings. We've had advisory committee meetings, where we've had very great participation from leaders, stakeholders, local businesses, institutions, library. We've had smaller meetings with many of the stakeholders, and of course, many meetings with staff. We've looked at many options for both the square and the street. Today, we're not going to go through all of that. We're going to primarily focus on the final option that has been vetted by everyone, and we're very delighted at how it's moving forward. And then finally, on the process coming up, today we're doing the City Council presentation, but very important, on April 18th, we are doing a public forum. This is the only public forum in our scope for this project, where we're going to share these concepts. Again, they are concepts with everyone. The public can come and see. We'll bring our models and our boards. We hope you will all come, bring your family, your kids, your neighbors, your in-laws, so they can come and see what's happening and give us good feedback. Per the grant that this project was funded by, we have to be completed by May 31st. And we're very delighted that we are on target. As Mike mentioned, we do want to remind you that this phase was what we call conceptual design. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. But after that, like any design project, when it goes through construction documents, prior to that, there's a second phase called design development. And then, of course, we do construction documents. So we hope you'll be excited tonight and continue to figure out ways to fund the second phase and the third phase so these projects can move forward seamlessly. So even as we show you the conceptual designs for the street and square today, something to keep in mind, it's really in the second phase that all the details get vetted out, the color of the brick, the actual planting. So tonight we're going to show you the kind of overall concepts that we've developed for the square and the street. So we'll start with the square. From the start, I mean, it's a no-brainer. This really, we hope, will become the central gathering space for downtown. There aren't a lot of green spaces in Joliet today. This is a paved parking lot. And we understand in April, the demo of the county building is going to happen. So it's just an incredible setting. We have Rialto on one side, beautiful buildings all around, and no-brainer to think that this is going to continue to be an amazing gathering space. It already is. I mean, there are so many events that are happening there, even with this just being a parking lot, both on the square, in the square and the street. And we hope that both the street and square can continue to be, homes to these events, but you can now have a wonderful space that you can continue to add new ideas that the community brings to the table. So let me just show you this one slide that really captures a whole year's worth of work with everyone understanding how to kind of create what we call distinct rooms. So when we approach an outdoor square, we kind of think of it as these collection of outdoor rooms. If you go to Millennium Park, you've got an area where the Bean is, the Crown Fountain, you have the Lurie Garden. They're all connected, but there's this sense that there are specific spaces that do different things. So we'll just walk you through some of these distinct rooms that allow you to have different experiences. In front of the Rialto, there's a zone that we're calling the Plaza that we feel should be very well connected to the Rialto, be very usable in the evening. So we'll walk you through the details of that. Then in front of the library, we have an area that we're calling the Library Garden that can be programmed by the library, can be a bit more appropriate for children and parents. And in the middle, we have what we call the green, which is going to be this wonderful lawn area that can be used in many, many ways during different seasons, different times of the day. There are these two areas that we're calling, one is the lounge and the curtain. The lounge will be this area that's shaded and will be a wonderful seating area for students all day, especially for students in St. Francis as well as Joliet Junior College and other institutions that hopefully will come to downtown. And then we have what we call a curtain area that will be a great buffer for the parking. Couple of things, when we started, we spent quite a lot of time trying to figure out what to do with the parking garage. In this scheme, we are taking a very different approach that perhaps in these phases, instead of spending more money in trying to make the garage look better, we are taking on an approach of using landscaping. Put your money in the square to screen the garage, and long-term, perhaps there are many options to look at how to address the garage. So before we show you our designs, we just wanted to touch base a little bit on Millennium Park. There are a few lessons from Millennium Park that we hope to bring to this project. This master plan was done by a firm that I worked with. Many lessons learned here. For Millennium Park, the Bean, the Pritzker Pavilion, all the Crown Fountain, all these things that we love came later. First and foremost, they created a beautiful canvas of a beautiful square with these outdoor rooms that then allowed the city and other donors to start adding more things to it. So instead of a park being designed around a sculpture, designed around a specific theme, this was a classic, timeless park that was designed first as a canvas that created the setting for new things to happen. So we think this is a very successful, appropriate model for our square here. So this is our concept plan for the square, and there are different components. We're going to show you details on these, but I'll just walk you through the major ideas here. First and foremost, as you can see, Rialto Theater is here. We are literally looking at a plaza area that feels like a red carpet. We are looking at changing the paving of Chicago Street, and all these things have been vetted by our engineering department and staff, with our engineers also. To look at what we call a speed table, it'll be very, very slow, very gentle, but the idea that it slows traffic down in the evening, you can close it off. for special events. But the idea that this feels like an extension that people can cross very safely, and in the evening, it just feels like the Rialto, this is their outdoor plaza. At the heart of the plaza, we have what we call a zero depth fountain. This is very similar to Crown Fountain. It has literally no depth. So when the fountain is closed, it just becomes a surface. It's a plaza that can be used when the fountain's open. It can be used at night, all through the summer. It becomes a place that all ages, especially children, can come and play. Then we have the classic lawn or the green, very similar to Millennium Park, that can be used for many different uses. We have the lounge area here, where we're looking at a kiosk at the corner that can have refreshments, you can sell coffee, and then we have a seating area. And more importantly, in the heart of the project, we have what we call a stage. This was an element that we were asked to add later on. The idea of a simple stage that, when it's not being used for events, can just be used for seating, but you don't have to have the expense of hauling in a stage and other equipment when you have events. So then we have the library garden here. We are thinking this could have an iconic sculpture, again, to be determined once you have the space, what that is. But from the corner, you see the sculpture and it draws you in, and then we want to make this very child-friendly. And then finally, we have what we call the curtain. That's what we are calling a scrim. If you've been to Bryant Park, that's a classic example of having beautiful trees and a lot of understory planting that doesn't hide the alley in the back, but allows you to create a wonderful sense of enclosure. We're going to walk you through a lot of these in greater detail, but one thing to point out, we are creating that canvas so that you can add iconic things in the future. And some locations we think might be appropriate, as we said, a great iconic sculpture here. You could have a wonderful iconic sculpture like a bean right across from the Rialto. And then, of course, the kiosk could be designed in a very different way to really capture your imagination at the corner. And then finally, the garage, we are showing this purple line. There are 500 things you could do with it. We showed a lot of ideas, but all depending on money. You could have big fonts saying something, you could have neon lighting, landscaping, many things that could be added on. In terms of the transformation, if you look at it today, we are primarily focusing on making sure this is a very green plaza. Again, downtown Joliet does not have a lot of green spaces that you can hang out all day, in the evening, as well as through the seasons. So here we are showing, this is literally a rendering that is done showing you a noon rendering, the shadows. So we have enough shade as well as sun. You can choose where you want to sit, and we think it's going to be a great gathering place for all the workers who are here and the students and community. We want to make sure this is a wonderful place in the evening as you're starting to get more restaurants and people are at the theater. So as you can see, this is an evening view with the new street lights coming in, the plaza being lit, the iconic sculptures being lit. This, we hope, will be an amazing, safe, very attractive place to hang out if you're here for the theater or eating at a restaurant. We want this plaza to be a place for all seasons. One of the things we were asked to do is to make sure the plaza element, this is the only hardscaped element in this square, can accommodate winter or seasonal markets. This is Bryant Park, where the park gets transformed by Christmas markets in the winter. These are your own markets. So we do think not only can you hold these markets on the street by closing it off, but you could extend that and have some space here to bring in stalls that would activate the square. In the fall, you see the leaves turning color, and again, you could close off the fountain and hold events at the stage, and you could build on the events that you're having, but you could also bring in things that could attract the community and little children. And finally, winter, we always want to make sure our outdoor spaces are very active in the winter also. In the winter, just like Millennium Park and Bryant Park, the fountain area would literally become an ice skating rink. This is, what it becomes standard for almost all squares and plazas right now. So this becomes a wonderful ice skating rink that hopefully attracts all ages. And then we are looking maybe your Christmas tree. You have a beautiful tradition of the Christmas tree and the Christmas lighting and the parades. The Christmas tree could be at the heart of the stage, and then you could have many kinds of uses for the lawn also. So I guess these are all the details. This is kind of the concept right now. All these details will be developed in much greater detail in the next phase. But I think the underlying idea is that the square and the plaza is flexible for all of you. It becomes a flexible canvas that you can program and add more detail as time goes on. Some of these details we'll walk you through quickly. You can see the plaza right here. This is what we call a zero depth fountain, which means there is no depth. There are no rims. It is ADA accessible actually, and kids can walk in and do their splashing. And when it gets closed, it just becomes a plaza. And in winter, this becomes an ice skating ring. And we think this is going to be an amazing feature here. The green, most plazas now, again, we are really trying to make sure that this is a mecca for the youth, as your downtown plan said. And young people use parks and squares in a very different way than we did. They will do yoga there. They'll come and do strange dance exercises just like that. And so we just want to make sure, we don't know in the future what they're doing, that this green is just simple and clean. And you can figure out as time goes on many ways to use this sunny place. And again, as we mentioned, one of the critical changes we've made is to make sure there's a simple stage here that allows you to have musical concerts and all of that, and there's access on the back. Before we move on, just a couple of things just to note. We didn't quite talk too much about parking and alley, but this is, after many options we've looked at, this is the party right now, and we really like it. We are trying to maximize on-street parking, not only for this block, but all along Chicago Street, to make sure there's enough on-street parking for all the retailers. On every block, we're trying to do what we call these bump outs so that people can cross very safely, and it defines the on-street parking better. We're trying to maximize street trees that don't, obscure the retail. In this specific block, we are actually extending Van Buren, and this would allow St. Francis to be on an actual street as opposed to being on a plaza. It allows to have some on-street parking there, and we're keeping that alley in the back. We are hoping to pave it a bit differently so that that still allows fire access and maybe access to the parking if needed, but also allows you to walk down there safely. Some of these other spaces, this is looking at the green from the lounge. We can have many kinds of fun seating for students and everyone to look out in the green. The library garden, we just threw an idea there. Who knows what this is going to be, but you could have a sculpture that was looking like books and kids could play on that. It could be really all to be defined. But then this is something we actually did in Glenview, which was very popular, the idea of outdoor swings that are for adults and for young kids that would create a nice buffer from the street, but allow parents to look into these spaces. And again, showing how the Storyteller's Corner could actually have a book theme, or it could have some really amazing pieces of kid-friendly sculpture. And then finally, this piece, when we talked about the back alley, we wanted to make sure it didn't feel like an alley, that again, through these trees, we're showing a lot of birches here. You could still see that. It didn't feel unsafe at the evening. It'll be lit properly. That maybe there is a nice paving pattern there. Here we were just thinking maybe it is a library book code, but it could be, all to be determined what that is. So finally, you see the transformation of something that's completely paved and not very user-friendly. It still feels like one space, but has these distinctive rooms that are their own thing, but are flexible enough to be used in all season and all times of the day by all ages. We'll move to the street. With the street, this was a bit of a different focus. This is, as you know, beautiful, classic, historic street. Many beautiful buildings, but even before in the 1910s, this was what we now like to say multimodal. You could walk down, you could park on the street. There was an actually streetcar running in the middle. So in the 60s or the 70s, I can't remember when, this was done. At that time with our downtowns declining, this was the same thing was done to many of our streets in downtown Chicago. This street, the pavement became very curved. As you can see, this is the actual curb line. It kind of winds, it's not straight. And the sidewalks were made wider. There's lack of a bit of a consistency. And everywhere this was done, we found this has actually done more damage to the street level retail. You're not quite sure where to park. It minimizes on-street parking. It makes sometimes easy and sometimes difficult to cross in the intersections, and many of the trees are in really bad shape. So we have looked at the whole street, but here we're going to show you one specific block. This is right across from the library. One of the big questions for this project was, is there going to be a dedicated bike lane on Chicago Street? That means there's a separate lane that's only for bicyclists. So we looked at all those options. We found that if we put that in, we actually had to take out quite a lot of parking on the street. So in this case, we felt that the parking, on-street parking, was far more critical. So we have a larger idea of where dedicated bike trails could go in downtown. But for now, for Chicago Street, we are showing what is called a sharrow, which means it's a shared lane. It's nothing uncommon. It's a wide shared lane. And this has been looked at by engineers, our engineers and yours, to basically have the center lane. It's two-way traffic to be shared by both. Our focus has been more on really the beautification of this street. So again, as we mentioned, for every block, we are trying to create these pedestrian bump outs so that people can cross safely. In special locations, we would like to see intersections be paved or painted differently so they feel special. We have created a strong rhythm of hardy trees on planters, but kept enough space for sidewalk cafes and people to walk. So a little bit of detail here. If you zoom in on the sidewalk area, what we are doing, this is the consistent streetscape kind of cross-section. We are keeping a clear 8-foot zone for people to walk. We want them to walk, near your cafe so they'll get hungry and, grab a cup of coffee or go to eat or look at your stores. And there's a consistent parkway planter here. Now we are showing a simple rail here, whether that says Route 66 or something, all of those in the next phase will be designed. But we are looking at hardy trees that don't have a lot of, won't obscure your retail windows, but will bring in shade, and then a lot of landscaping. Where you have the opportunity to create a sidewalk cafe without losing that rhythm, that 8-foot sidewalk cafe zone, planter zone, you would just miss 1 or 2 planters and be able to accommodate that. This condition actually exists in front of your, what is it? The cafe that we always go to. Jitters is already doing that. We've actually talked a lot with your local retailers, and they love this idea. They're already doing this, but so this would be a wonderful, consistent welcome through the street. For the landscaping, we've looked at, we're creating a whole palette, but the whole idea is, again, just like the plaza, that there are certain things that we call classic bones that you never rip out again, that they stay, but then there are things that keep changing. So this is a strategy that City of Chicago does. There are classic trees. Hopefully once you plant them, they will stay here for the next 100 years. And then the understory, you can decide, you can do seasonal tulips, seasonal annuals. So there's a hardy and annual planting scheme that we're looking at. And then finally, before we wrap up, we just wanted to give you a quick update on some of the related projects. As we said, as you all know, the Chicago Street reopening project is moving forward in full steam. This is an amazing gateway into our project that starts at Jefferson. We are already looking, the city is already looking at construction starting in 2019. So once that opens, our project starts right here. We think it creates this incredible momentum to keep going on Chicago Street. As we mentioned, the demo of the Will County building is slated for this next month. The city has already applied for an ITIP grant for the Chicago Street project. So we're hoping by end of this year, we get some good news there. And then, of course, the city is we hope will be considering all kinds of options to fund the next phases. Just to remind you what those are, as we said, we are hoping to complete the conceptual design phase by end of May. And we hope that there's a smooth transition to keep going on really coming up with a detailed design for both the street and the square. And hopefully that can go seamlessly into the construction document phase. And with that, we are again so delighted. This has been quite an incredible project, and just seeing all the changes happening already. We hope we have an amazing forum on the 18th, and you will all come. And again, thank you again for this great opportunity to work on this project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is citizens to be heard on agenda items. First is Scott Ward, Council Memo 150-18.
Good evening. My name is Scott Ward. I live in Wedgewood subdivision, just south of Wedgewood Golf Course. And I'm here to just voice my opinion, I guess. I came to the zoning council meeting the other day, and they told me to come back to this instead. But I'm concerned with the traffic and safety around the corner of 59 and Caton Farm. I'm assuming the Hawk auto dealership is going in there. What I would like to know is, or I don't know if you guys answer questions, so forth or not. I'm just gonna state that the traffic in that area, I believe that that intersection is the second or third most dangerous intersection in the city. The last thing we need right there is more driveways coming out onto both of those streets. I understand the want to keep the dealership in the city for tax dollars and so forth. I appreciate that. And I'm not entirely opposed to this dealership going in. What I am opposed to is the traffic concerns there. I saw on the map the other day that there was going to be 2 entrances off of 59, right in and right out, and 1 entrance off of Caton Farm Road, directly across from the condo entrance there. That's probably the minimum that you could have with a business like that. But my concerns are we going to put in turn lanes? I could not tell on the map the other day, and the zoning council couldn't answer that question. I'm concerned that there needs to be turn lanes on both 59 and Caton Farm to get in and out of those driveways. If you travel over there at any time, but especially between probably 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock any day, or on Saturdays and Sundays, it is a very, very busy intersection. If you are heading west from the Jewel crossing 59 on Caton Farm, we've got a huge problem there. You're heading into the sunset with the bright sun over there. It's a very busy intersection. You have currently, you're able to turn left into the BP gas station. And this is also part of my concern. I see that if we continue to allow cars to turn left into that gas station, that's almost a turn lane most of the day. If we don't put a turn lane in going into the Hawk Motors, that makes Caton Farm Road a 1-lane road. Anybody that lives west of 59 knows that heading west, you better be in the right-hand lane right now. Because if you're in the left-hand lane, you run the risk of rear-ending somebody in front of you wanting to turn left at the gas station and getting rear-ended from behind from somebody doing the same thing. Okay? So I have 2 concerns, and maybe you've already addressed these, I don't know. The turn lanes going in and out of the dealership would be a huge addition for public safety. And I also think that we need to put those plastic pylons, those little poles, in the middle of the road so that you cannot turn left into the BP gas station. That already is a huge concern, creates tons of accidents, and it's going to get worse with more driveways, more traffic. I understand that there was talk of a stoplight on Caton Farm going into the car dealership, and the zoning council told me the other day that they thought that that was nixed, and I hope that's true. That would be another nightmare, putting another stoplight in right there. We'd have what, 5 or 6 stoplights in about a quarter mile right there, if that one got put in as well. Those are my concerns. Turn lanes, and don't underestimate the pylons going into the gas station. To me, that is huge, and if this car dealership wasn't going in, I would still recommend that. And every citizen I've talked to that lives over there, every time I've said that to them, they're like, that's a great idea. So those are my concerns on the auto dealership.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak on an agenda item this evening? Seeing none, we'll pass it over to the city manager
Yes.
to.
Is there anything, if we were to look at that, what his suggestion was, is there anything to stop us from doing that? In the state or anything, or?
Mayor, I visited this a couple of years ago, and now with Hawk most likely going in there, we should revisit that on the turn. But Marty, was it you? I think it was you I talked to. There was some kind of agreement with the BP. Has it run its course? Has it sunsetted?
Oh, you know what, I have to go back and revisit that.
That was their only hang-up, is there was an agreement with the BP when they developed it many years ago to allow for that left turn and to put that no stopping area in. And I'm hoping it's sunsetted because it is something we should address.
Well, yeah, because when they came out there was nothing out there.
Right.
So that's.
But things have changed
I
since
know,
then.
a lot.
I just don't know if our hands are tied.
That's why I want to know, can we do something about that?
We're gonna address Hawk, it's on the agenda, so when we get to questions for Jim Trisna.
Right.
No, but I meant traffic-wise with, BP and any agreements with, traffic and things like
Marty,
that.
can you get back to us on that?
Something we can do. Okay, thanks.
Pass it over to the city manager to discuss tomorrow night's agenda items.
Mayor and council, tonight, I'd like to run through and discuss the agenda for tomorrow night. We do have a presentation, I think, that's been added for tomorrow night, the Transformation Center, Dr. Patrick Isaac. Krista, I don't have any information, I don't think, on this one. Do you know?
It's just an overview of a new service that they're offering. Is
Yeah,
that
they met with me, they're new to town and they want to introduce
Oh,
themselves to the
okay,
council.
all right. Yeah, I'm just not as familiar, thank you. Have two proclamations for tomorrow night. We do have a late one, just also recognizing veterans. Don't have that sheet in front of me, but two proclamations, the one listed and then one in recognition of the veterans.
Vietnam
Or
Veterans Day.
War,
Mayor,
excuse me.
or David.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, moving on, let's see, we've got, of course, the council committee reports. Public service is tomorrow night, as well as finance and economic development was last week. Consent agenda, as you notice here, we have some prior council meeting minutes, invoices. I think it's one position vacancy. And then Council Memo 14318, 2018, deteriorated roadway resurfacing program. For this, Public Works has prepared a map, and it's down there in your mailboxes, that lists all the streets on a map of Joliet that are planned for resurfacing or otherwise repair this summer. So we thought you might like to take that map, and if you're out and about, you can actually go and see each and every one of these, I think dozens, more than a couple of dozen of roads that are due for resurfacing this summer. So hopefully that's beneficial. Under licenses and permit applications, well, I wasn't here last year, but the carnival is coming back to the Louis Joliet Mall Spring Carnival. Please note in the memo that there will be an increased police enforcement presence because of concerns from last year. So the police chief does feel that this increased enforcement is appropriate, necessary, and you'll have that. Didn't know if you had any other questions you wanted to ask the police chief.
Yeah, I did.
On that.
Chief Ben, last year, obviously there was the high profile incident where the carnival had to get shut early. Were there problems throughout the entire event, or was it a one-time thing that kind of blew up?
No, that was at the end of the night. There were some conflicts that occurred, probably because it was getting ready to close. But we did have to shut it down a little bit early. I think it was about a half hour early. And the next night, we had additional officers there. There wasn't a problem with it. So throughout the course of the event, it was peaceful. It's just that one incident that escalated. So through an abundance of caution, we'd like to have additional officers there throughout the carnival this time. And they've agreed to do so. We have an additional officer on the day slot, and then we have 2 additional officers in the evening each night on the weekends.
Mayor?
Yes.
Chief, is the carnival paying for the extra security?
Yes.
They are? Okay.
$42 an hour.
Yes.
Chief, did I hear you right? And you've already
$42
approached the carnival in the mall, and they agree with the
Staff
beefing up of the
them
police
and
protection.
told them that this would be our recommendation, so I'm told they've agreed to do so, and I saw the staffing numbers today, and again, it's like I just presented to you with 2 additional officers each evening.
Thanks,
4
Chief.
total each night for the weekend.
Thank you.
Hang on.
If there's nothing else, we'll move on. Under public hearings, it is noted in the staff memo that the petitioner has withdrawn their request for this annexation. This would incorporate, I believe it's the Love's gas station. So there, we don't have a date yet, but ultimately when they do return and refile, there will be re-advertising, re-notices to surrounding property owners, etc. So that's an update. If you'd like, Kendall Jackson can share anything more that we may know. Don't know if there is much more. Is there?
Well,
Mr.
actually,
Jackson?
there was a submittal for Plan Commission applications this past Friday. So the Plan Commission will see these annexations coming forward in April.
Oh, okay. All right.
And I think that will be the final. There'll be no more tabling. Well,
if I could address the council, since the question was asked, Michael Hansen, I represent Love's. At this point in time, Mr. Jackson does not even know what I know. I apologize, but we're going to be continuing this matter at this point, particular time, and not even going at the April agenda at this point. So we still have a little more work to do before we bring this to council, and that'll be the schedule.
So no public hearing tomorrow?
No public hearing tomorrow, yeah.
Next, we do have a public hearing on annexation of 4 parcels near the southeast corner of Brandon Road and Zurich Road. But it's being recommended that that item be tabled. So will there be a need for a public hearing tomorrow, Mr. Jackson?
no need for a public hearing tomorrow.
Okay, no public hearing, it'll just be tabled.
Correct.
Okay. Before we move on to the Hawk Motor Park subdivision, I did have placed in each one of your areas in front of you a copy of the subdivision regulations. If you'd look at that for just a minute, there's a section in there entitled 1.14 on variations. Just wanted to share with you that we are reinstating what has been an ordinance requirement for some time, and that is when a petitioner wants to seek a variance or any kind of waiver or otherwise a variance from the subdivision regulations, city ordinance does require that those variance requests go first to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will take up the petitioner's requests, and as you go through this, it's kind of lengthy document, but basically the petitioner is to put in writing and to put together their justification, rationale for seeking the variance request. And then the Planning Commission is to make certain findings as part of their recommendation, which would then go to the mayor and the city council. Ultimately, it is the city council's prerogative and right and responsibility to rule on whether or not the variance should be granted subject to review and consideration of the Planning Commission recommendation. As an example, let's say some things, if the petitioner wanted to modify the width of the road, what if the petitioner wanted to eliminate curbs and gutters, if the petitioner wanted to eliminate sidewalk installation, if the petitioner wanted to eliminate street lights, if there is anything contained within the subdivision regulations, and if the petitioner felt that there was rationale, justification for a variance, and to not adhere, comply with those regulations, the ultimate decision-making body is the city council. It's not the city manager, not the director of public works, community director, or anyone else. Now that's the current ordinance. The council always has the ability to alter, modify these ordinances, but we're reinstituting this process as found in the city ordinance. And I bring that up because tonight, and I'm sure in the meetings in the future, you are going to see now and then when a project is seeking for modifications, waivers, exceptions, et cetera, we are going to adhere to the ordinance and the process it has. And the petitioner, we want to make sure that they have a chance to review this and in their petition speak specifically to the findings that the council has to make, either for or against the variance. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. And that's a little diversion, but I think that'll come in as we talk about at least one project tonight, maybe other projects in the future. So with that, unless there's any questions you might have on that, let's move on to the.
I have a question, David.
Yes.
Because I know we've been in some discussion about one particular project that was already, which I would classify already kind of in the process. And this information wasn't given to what we call the petitioner or the developer prior to their knowledge. And it's probably on them that they should know this because it is an ordinance, but I guess they were going on past practice of asking for a waiver. So I guess my question is, with them already being in the process and now getting this, it's kind of setting them back on their construction table or calendar.
Yep.
So, and again, and I know they probably should have did their due diligence to know what the ordinance was, but I guess staff didn't inform them. And even when they talked to me, I'm just going on what I've heard happen in the past. Until, you know, you inform me of this particular ordinance. So I guess, again, what I'm asking, with them already being in the process, or, you know, I'm asking for feedback from the council, the mayor and the council, I mean, how do we handle that in terms of being fair, for, you know, lack of a better word, to anybody that was not given this information prior to going through the process?
Sure, yeah. Let me first offer some of my comments and then I'll turn to Marty. But I think it's important to point out is first and foremost, the ordinance has been written this way for some time. So whether it's been a practice that staff didn't follow, didn't adhere to, maybe they weren't necessarily aware of, that I can't say, but I think we got to first keep in mind that the law or the city code has been consistent for many, many years. That should have been the practice. Just because staff, and I think tonight we'll be talking about the building code regulations, you know, and if you've seen those in its entirety, there's a lot of information. So throughout the nation, oftentimes when a public official makes an error, maybe fails to recall a regulation, and if someone moves ahead and let's say builds something and it was never caught, And again, corporate counsel can address this too. That doesn't relieve the petitioner from having to abide by the law as it exists. So just because a city official makes an error and doesn't bring something to that attention, doesn't negate, at least as far as the courts have said, the efficacy of that ordinance and that it has to be applied by. Marty, do you want to add anything, since it'd be a different matter if we were proposing a change, but where this has been the ordinance for some time, do you want to weigh in on that question?
That's exactly what the answer is. So in other words, if someone says you can build a shed in your backyard, and then you give them a map, you know, staff does, of your entire backyard, even though it doesn't have the 10-foot requirement, you know, and they build it right next to the house, well, the city is, you know, doesn't have the right to let someone do that. So.
Let me also, just for benefit of the council, and I have spoken to the representative of the petitioner. Not only have they made a written request seeking a variance, but we also provided them with a copy of the ordinance. So if they wanted to amend that and address specifically what the Planning Commission has to consider, and then they can go to the Planning Commission, seek a recommendation, but here again, it'll ultimately be to the council where it should be to kind of weigh pro and con, whether to agree to the variance or not to agree to the variance. So it's still up to, ultimately to the council to decide which way you go.
So my understanding is this gives more flexibility. The council can override the ordinance. Not technically override, but the council will have the ability to override what staff or what the Planning Commission may
Correct. But keep in mind, similar to a special use permit, there is certain findings. So it's not just to agree or disagree. And I think that's where we would recommend both Planning Commission and then I would say even the council should be careful to look at the findings that you need to kind of come up with to be consistent with or to support whatever decision you choose to act on, either to grant the variance or not.
Mayor? Yes. So to simplify it, I think, you know, if I understand you correctly, David, what you're saying is we have a set of criteria that applies to all that come and make the applications. If we go outside that set of, of criteria to decline someone or to approve them, there could be lawsuits saying, we followed your ordinance, why did you say no? So we got to be careful to adhere to what the ordinance outlines as our criteria.
And let me turn to Marty. Yes, I've seen case law where sometimes the judge, when you make it a little bit more intricate, certain findings have to be made. At least, wouldn't you say the courts will kind of possibly review that, but any other comment you may want to give as to whether or not if someone challenges the council's decision to agree or not agree, and let's say you have no findings, or is there anything you may want to weigh in on that, how the courts may look at those type issues?
Findings are more important. More findings are better.
Yeah. And especially in writing, right?
Yeah.
Or to have a record that shows what was the basis for the decision you made.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not disagreeing.
I understand. I understand.
That. I'm speaking on, and let me maybe put it this way. If in my business, if one of my employees tell a customer something, and it's not what we would normally do,
right?
I have to abide by that because my customer, my employee,
right,
told this customer that. Now I tell my employee from this point on, any new customers, this is how it's to be done. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about what's the law now or what it has been. I'm going by these people that have already applied for their permits, and then they're told you have to go to the Plan Commission when they weren't told that. And again, it may have been on their part that they should have knew this.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if that was a good example, but.
Well, and that's a good point. The distinction is.
I'm not talking about.
The distinction is that if it's a business and you're the owner, you establish the rules that the employees have to follow. In the case of the ordinances, those are the laws that both the city manager and the employees have to abide to. We have no discretion as to whether or not to, we have no authority. No authority has been delegated to us from the council to waive a requirement that by ordinance is a mandatory shall be done by that petitioner. So that's one of the distinctions. Ultimately, you know, you control what the law is, and we have to abide by it until it's changed or the council wishes to delegate, say, to the city manager, a certain amount of discretion. It's just like a police officer. Police officer goes out there and they do have a certain amount of discretion, you know, to give a verbal warning, give a written warning, a ticket, not in all cases, but in this case of these subdivision regulations, the discretion has not been given to staff.
Okay, that's
does that
fine.
help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. I'm good. You
okay.
Need to waste no more time on that. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Wait, I gotta get this clear. So in other words, if our employee says you can do this, then it's not against our ordinance, they have the right to come to the city council and we can either back up what the employee said, even though it's against the ordinance, or we have to comply with the ordinance and just tell our employee didn't know he made a mistake, because this is what it is. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Marty, help me. You know,
Yes.
I'm not sure I'm following that. If a developer.
If our employee doesn't know and says something, okay, you can build a garage like right on the property line, which you can't. There's a zoning ordinance that you have to be back. And so then the petitioner comes back and says, you know, well, your employee told me that I could do this. I pulled the permits and everything, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. So, but that's against our ordinance. So if the employee didn't know, this petitioner has a right to come to the council, and we can either back up the employee and say, well, he made a mistake, but since you already built this, it's okay. Or since you made the plans for it, it's okay. Or we have to say, we're sorry, he made a mistake. We have to go by our ordinance. So what are we doing here? We can back the employee up or just say he made a mistake. He had no right to tell you that. He or she had no right to tell you that. Because this has happened in the past. This is not the first time this has happened.
Well, nationally,
yeah.
You know, there's many instances where, yes, someone built something.
Oh yeah, it was long time ago.
Contrary to the regulations, and sometimes the suit is not brought. You know, sometimes it's by other parties, and the courts then have to make a ruling. But anyway, Marty,
if it's something that can be varied, then yes.
That's varied too.
In other words, if you know, the council or the planning commission is allowed to vary the distance from a garage, then the answer is yes.
But it's setting ourselves up because we're going against our own ordinance. So we're setting ourselves up for an ordinance or a lawsuit. Okay.
and keep in mind, I think there is, you know, as you look at those regulations, you know, ultimately many of these, you know, were approved by a council, and they were approved in the interests of public safety, public health, public welfare, and consistency. And I think that's a critical element. That doesn't mean that every time everything's going to have to be consistent, but when you look at fairness, equity, and who is going to pay for those improvements, is it new growth? Is it the applicant or the general taxpayers? All those are you know, issues that it's very appropriate for a council to consider.
Well, I would
just if you waive it one time, but in the future you want to install it later on, then it could be the general taxpayers.
Well, I would just suggest in the future, no matter what it is, our employees should check our ordinances before they give any type of permission.
Yes.
And if they don't know the answer, say, I'll get back to you. So we're not put in this position.
I agree.
So it's about education and communication.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, man.
Yes.
I just want to be clear. Because the employee might be looking at this. They didn't tell the people that they could. They just went on past practice that the city manager gave the approval. and not the
Good
plan
point. I
commission.
think that was
I
more
just
the
wanna be clear.
practice.
I'm not throwing anybody under the bus.
They would bring,
I'm done.
my understanding of the past was they would bring it to the city manager and say, city manager, do you want to waive this or not?
Right. So
Without-
before you do anything wrong, I just want to make that clear. For far as what I know, they just was going by past practice. Because I don't think any of these type of variants has been brought to the council. I said I was done. We didn't kill enough time on that. I got a good understanding now.
We could just put Marty for it.
Can I just, one final comment, and I think this is incumbent upon all employees, is first and foremost, council adopts the law, the code, city employees have to administer, but employees need to know what the law is in sometimes excruciating details so that we can help make sure that we fully educate the applicant as to what the law says is mandatory or discretionary, or that it is something that is subject to maybe submitting a variance. And when you have a large workload, and it's been a while since you've looked at the ordinance, sometimes we need to make sure our employees have the time and the training to make sure they know what the laws are and the regulations, including all changes that have been made over the years. Unfortunately, we have some very archaic, very old ordinances and regulations that is just like the upcoming comprehensive plan. When was the last time those were updated? I think back in the 60s. Not all of them, but many things. So we got to keep these ordinances modern, current, and we need to make sure they're serving our best interests and still leaving the discretion, flexibility where we want it, but where we don't, it's going to be more mandatory. So we all have a lot of, I think, work to do. All right.
Anything else, Chair?
Moving on. I'm going to ask Kendall Jackson, Community Development Director. Would you come or just speak to item under ordinance Council Memo 150-18? We have 4 items, possibly others here. Would you give an update on the Planning Commission action of last week on the Hawk Motor Park subdivision and related matters, A through D, please?
Yeah, so we have the Hawk matter that came before the Plan Commission last week. There was a request for reclassification of just under 1 acre from R1 single family residential to B3 general business zoning. That small parcel was a vestige of something that was left over from the earlier rezoning that happened, and in order to bring it all into conformance with what the development plan is, they needed to ask for a rezoning of that small parcel. We also saw a preliminary plat of the Hawk Motor Park subdivision and a request for approval of a recording plat. All of those matters were taken up at the Plan Commission. There was a recommendation for approval of the reclassification as well as the subdivision plats. There was also, which we just went through rather exhaustively, with the waiver request, there was some discussion about sidewalk waiver on Caton Farm Road as well as Route 59. There was discussion on a traffic study and a statement from a consulting engineer about warrants for a traffic signal along Caton Farm Road there. The Plan Commission recommended approval of the waiver for the sidewalk on Caton Farm Road, but upheld staff's recommendation to essentially have a sidewalk installed along Route 59.
So with that, I'd like to see if the council has any questions about Council Memo 150-18, A, B, C, and D.
Two questions. What was the background for not wanting to put a sidewalk at Caton Farm?
The sidewalk at Caton Farm, the staff felt that with the golf course being there, there was really no, I guess, future linkage for a sidewalk along Caton Farm Road. We didn't foresee anything where the golf course was going to go away and that property, the total property being redeveloped, which would then require, sidewalk along Caton Farm Road. On Route 59, a bit of a different story with the dealership development, as well as the potential development of a lot just to the north of the dealership, providing public pedestrian safety across the frontage of Route 59 between the dealerships, as well as the future development lot in the future.
And my second question is, I'm looking at the map here and I see where it's angled off between Caton and 59. And there is a beautiful bronze statue there that was put in there by Newman Homes years ago. What's going to happen to that? Is that going to stay there?
My understanding is that the golf course wants to keep the statue on the property and relocate it to the clubhouse area.
Because if you move it to the clubhouse area, no one's going to be able to see it. But when you're there, I mean, it's such a beautiful piece of art. And if you ever look at it up close, the intricacy of it with the slingshot in the little boy's back pocket, looking at the flag, I'm afraid that it'll get lost. I mean, only the golfers would be able to see it if they're going to put it at the clubhouse. And I was wondering, maybe we could ask them if they could just leave it there if no one else has a problem with that.
I'm not sure. The attorney is here. I'm not sure if there is any discussion with Hawk.
Yeah, Councilman Coleman, we have discussed that matter with the Partridge. The Partridge does want, they own the statue. They do want it moved, to the Wedgwood facility and put right there. And that's in our interest as well. So
they want it moved?
They're going to move it, yes, over to Wedgwood, correct.
That's a shame because no one's going to be able to see it except if you play golf.
I think a lot of people will be able to see it.
Golfers.
Well, Caton Farm is heavily traveled.
Okay, as long as it's not going to be destroyed.
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just was curious if Councilman Morris had it. No. The councilwoman asked my question, so I got my clarification on the lack of a sidewalk, which makes sense to me on the Caton Farm side. So we are going to add into this as we move forward on figuring out there is going to be quite a bit of additional, which is a good thing, traffic coming from 59 and turning, onto Caton Farm to get into the proposed Hawk. And we do have to address that whole problem that's been developing for years in front of that gas station. So that will be part of it, that we need to address that problem. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Let me just make one comment. There was discussion at the Planning Commission meeting about a traffic signal, on that stretch of road, but I do believe that you bring up a good point, because even today, as I was meeting with the Public Works Director and traffic engineer, let's see, I think it's Caton Farm Road is a special regional arterial. And the more and more we were getting in this, I think it would be appropriate to kind of take a look at that whole stretch, because we heard about the gas station, the auto dealership, and I think it might be appropriate to come back with more analysis and recommendations. How can we maximize the public safety on that stretch? Because as we've all seen, on many of these arterials, you can't overload traffic signals up and down that street. Sometimes you have to, do other things to kind of keep traffic moving, but also to have it as safe as possible. And it's my understanding that this preliminary plat there is talk about a traffic signal at Old Mill Road?
There was, but it's
not included in the
final plat or the preliminary plat, no.
But nevertheless, I think we need to come back as quickly as we can with some good staff recommendations, talking with both this business owner and others, and see what we can recommend for the maximum safety of both pedestrians, businesses, and the traffic on both those roads, heavily traveled roads.
Well, and David, and I understand the staff recommendation, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, was against the traffic light right there at Old Mill, because it would actually create more of a problem with back up to 59. And to me, that makes sense.
Well, the other thing is, it is, if you want to get more detail with Russ Lewis, our traffic engineer, it did not meet warrants. That was our bigger issue.
We've talked
and
about warrants.
We don't want to start putting in signals. We talk about that at public service all the time, for stop signs when they're not warranted. They can cause more trouble than they're worth.
Exactly. So I'm in agreement there. I'm talking specifically, we have to revisit the turning left. Again, we have to revisit that. It's become more dangerous over the years as we got more development out in that area. And now this is a very positive development. Commercial is what we want.
Exactly.
But it's going to create even more. And we talk about keeping traffic flowing. Not being able to turn left is going to keep 2 lanes open. And, you know, I don't know if we've looked at any kind of a turn lane, but that's something that might be explored too, going into the Hawk to alleviate maybe a cutout to turn in.
All right. If there's nothing else, let's move on. Council Memo 15118, special use permit to allow 2 new auto dealerships. This is also in connection with the Hawk Motor Park subdivision. And Mr. Jackson, my understanding, the Planning Commission approved this as well.
Yes, there was a recommendation for approval of the special use permit.
Okay. Any questions on that matter? Moving on, Council Memo 15218, an ordinance on economic development, business retention program for new and used car dealers of the City of Joliet Code of Ordinances. Basically, this ordinance would eliminate, delete from the city ordinance a table, methodology, or consideration, and establish that these types of incentives would be dealt with, considered on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Jones, is that basically correct?
That's correct. It gives the city more flexibility in negotiating individual agreements, particularly in view of the fact that many of the manufacturers impose new requirements upon dealers for size of facility and location of facility. So this basically gives us flexibility to make sure that we retain and or attract dealers to this community.
Any questions on that ordinance? And okay.
I should point out, this was discussed at Economic Development Committee back in December, and it was unanimously approved for recommendation to full council.
Okay. All right, moving on, Council Memo 15318, an ordinance or a large ordinance that would adopt a number of various 2015 codes that we have, and I'd like to ask Dave Mackley, if nothing else, I think it's very appropriate you hear from Mr. Mackley one more time before his upcoming retirement here, and what better time is to bring us more current with a series of codes that his particular office deals with. Do you just want to briefly mention what the council's being asked to do as part of this council memo and ordinance?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and the council members, what we're asking for is that we would update our current code to the more current 2015 code. There's a lot of good reasons why we held off with the types of buildings that we currently construct in the city, standards that weren't in compliance previously with, especially some of the large warehouse buildings. The codes had not caught up to them. When the 2015 edition came out, they corrected a lot of those deficiencies. So as far as on the commercial end, this is an ideal time and an actual correct code for us to adopt. And then also to go over a few of the changes with you, probably some of the bigger changes is one of which that I think has some significance is that they actually changed the mile per hour rating for our area. And what Chris is displaying, you can go ahead and play that. I just grabbed something quick off the internet so I could kind of show you some of what the move is as we move to these higher wind conditions is that they are now going forward with more hurricane type bracing. And you can see, like in some of these pictures, we won't have the number of bracing that's depicted in these pictures, but we'll certainly have some of the bracing that actually takes and with these straps and with the bracing at the bottom of the studs, and then pretty soon here you'll see a brace that's actually let into the concrete. And then that is continued through all stories of the home and into the roof trusses. Here's actually a picture of that strap I was talking about that's actually poured into the foundation of the homes. And so what happens in effect is that, and we'll show you a video here in just a second, is that it really makes the homes much more stable and more resistant to the forces of tornadoes. It certainly does not make them tornado-proof by any means, but it makes them resistant. And if we can help to, at least at a minimum, hold the structure over people's heads, it makes that condition much safer for them to prevent them from being struck by flying debris. These are just more braces, more examples of braces that will be coming about if you go ahead and accept this the 2015 residential building code. If you want to go ahead, this was just one of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They have a big wind tunnel, and you can see on these houses here, the one on the right is hurricane protected, the one on the left is not, and how quickly it's actually blowing off of its base. That blowout actually happened at 95 miles per hour, so you can see the huge difference that the bracing makes on the structures. So that's one of the things that I just kind of personally am excited about, and I was sharing with Dave Hales, and he asked that I share that with you. Some of the other things that are going to be changed is that on the new construction in the homes, we're going to do the removal of Romex wiring. That's that plastic coated wiring that's ran through the studs. We're going to go to conduit finally on residential. Most cities are using conduit in residential. It's safer for the citizens. If you do have an issue with wiring, as the insulation would melt, it would cause the circuit to short and trip that breaker, thereby reducing potential fires. So we really think that that's, and even just the physical protection of the metal pipe around the wiring is a big step forward for us. Other things, I don't know, have you seen the tamper-resistant outlets that they offer now? Here. What I gave you were tamper-resistant outlets. We're going to require that in all new homes. I think that's an awesome product. And you can take that paper clip and play with the receptacle. You can't shove a single item into one side of that receptacle. In order to get that receptacle to function and accept the plug, you have to hit it dead on, both prongs. So what that does is it prevents children from slipping items in there, and you don't have to go out as a younger homeowner and buy all of those tamper resistant plugs that you have to put into all of your outlets. That would already take care of that. So that's a big step in some intrinsic safety in the residences. And then we're also going to increase the minimum size of breaker panel to 20 positions. What we've seen is in some of this new construction is they're trying to cheapen up and use a minimal amount of circuits, and we're just not seeing that to be satisfactory or to meet the needs of current standards. So we are upgrading that. And then a new section in the code that's really gone in depth is the solar energy. You're going to see a lot of that here in the near future. There's going to be a huge push in Will County for the solar renewable energy type things. You're going to see training programs that are going to come out. You're going to see a lot more commercial buildings that are going to utilize that technology. So they've really upped the efforts on the solar panels. So we're really excited about that. As you know, currently the IKEA out there has the largest solar array in Illinois on top of it. So that's pretty good thing to be proud of. You know, I mean, we really have come forward with our technologies out here. So as far as speaking with the builders, so that you know, I'm not really getting any pushback on these code changes. We've had state of Illinois had adopted the 2015 International Energy Code, which really upped the standards on all of the insulation for both the walls and the attics, and really caused some of these changes in the construction. So we're not seeing anything there. We also saw that it was the nuke energy side of the state that took over the radon remediation. So we're getting the radon remediation and mitigation systems in all the businesses. So a lot of these things that came about by the new state laws it's things that guys have been used to dealing with, and there's a lot of other communities around us that have adopted these codes. So I haven't gotten any pushback on it at all. I don't know if you got any additional questions.
Yes. When's the last time we updated?
The last was in 2004. We adopted the 2003.
So it's time to update. And then I had one question. I was going to ask Chris to replay the hurricane video.
Oh, yeah.
I noticed that the house on the left, we all noticed, blew away.
Right.
You sure that wasn't Photoshop? Because I noticed that the hanging plant on the right house did not blow off. It just hung like this.
No, you know what was one of the funny things when and I just wanted to show you some examples of it, but one of the funny things was that they actually had gone in on that house because they wanted to prove that, you know, they hadn't done anything phony. So if you were to continue to watch that whole segment, they actually go in and they cut all the strapping in the house, and then they can't get it to blow down. And so what they found out is that they had actually done a better job of the nailing pattern on that other house, which has also brought about some changes, especially around garage doors, where if you remember the old type construction, you had a header that came right to the cripple at the edge of the garage doors, and they found out if you extend that header across the entire garage into the corners, and then you nail the plywood in full sections instead of in pieces, that it actually improves the integrity of the structure. And one thing that they're trying to do, and one of the reasons that other home failed so quickly is that it's hard to see, but they flash like a little red box. It's because it actually blew the front door out. And that's one of the big things is as soon as you start losing your openings, you start getting that uplift force on the structure. So there was a couple things there that kind of made that look questionable, but.
I want to buy that hurricane-proof hanging plant.
Yep,
exactly. Pretty hardy plant.
Exactly.
If there's no other questions in the building code update? Thank you, Mr. Mack.
Thank you.
Moving on, Council Memo 15618, we have a resolution that pertains to being offered just a little under $11,000 to conduct tobacco compliance checks. This will be the 15th year that the police department has participated in this program. Is there any questions on this particular resolution and a continuation of this program by the police department with this outside funding? Council Memo 15718, and I'll group these together. 15718, 15818, 15918. All three of these resolutions deal with tax abatement agreements that were previously approved by the City Council a few years back. One is for the Mars Company, another for Cadence Premier Logistics, and the first one, Saddle Creek Logistics. The agreements have now been drafted, and we're bringing these for you so that upon approval, we can move ahead and ensure that the tax abatement payments are made to these companies as originally considered and approved by the council in the past. Any questions on any one of these three tax abatement agreements?
And Mayor, if I might just clarify, it's housekeeping. It goes back to what you said earlier today, David, to this evening too, about how maybe in the past things were done with inside baseball rules, things were glossed over. So I just want to make it clear that these projects are in development or have been finished.
Yes.
It really was a matter of that final step was never honored before, but our current finance director said, no, I want this on file. It was about dotting the i's and crossing the t's. Am I correct in clarifying that?
Yeah, even the ordinance at that time, I think, talked about giving certain amount of authority. My concern when I originally saw these is rather than addressing and adopting the agreements back in 15, it's been 3 years now. I wanted to make sure that the council saw these agreements in their entirety, which were not prepared 3 years ago, and you knew that we were now moving ahead with these abatements as called for, and then properly accounting for them financially in the current fiscal year, including any catch-up that may be necessary.
Thanks, David.
Okay. Moving on to, let's see, we have, we have a resolution authorizing execution of a first amended agreement to the economic development agreement with Mickey Oil Company Liquor Express. I'd like to have Steve Jones just comment on this first amendment and anything unique or in our recommendation on this.
Sure,
Mr. Jones.
This is something we just recently had on the agenda for our Economic Development Committee meeting. And to give you a little bit of background, back in 2014, the city adopted a resolution in the first agreement with Mickey's Oil to do a couple things. One, to create a business development district, and two, to create a system whereby there were some rebates of taxes that helped differentiate the burden of what the taxes were in Joliet and the sales side of things and selling fuel versus what Crest Hill had charged. So when the city put this together, I mean, clearly they were looking at a business that was being impacted by that differential, came up with a formula, said that it was a 10-year agreement, but had a benchmark in it. And the benchmark said that he was to meet that benchmark through the life of this agreement. Problem was, who in 2014 thought that fuel was going to take the big dip that it eventually did as a result of energy markets? So what happened was this agreement didn't really look at the fact that fuel prices could drop, which of course means that sales tax drops. Obviously, sales tax is based upon the actual value of the good. So if you're charging sales tax on a $4 gallon of gas, you're going to have more revenue than you would if it was a $2.50 gallon of gas. So in effect, because of the fact that energy markets changed, there was somewhat of a flawed logic in the agreement that no one saw. He did not meet that benchmark for the first 3 years. It's important because the agreement said that there's a termination provision where the city, at our discretion, could terminate the agreement if that benchmark isn't met. We looked at it, we examined it. I mean, clearly energy markets have changed. The owner is here along with his attorney, and they're contemplating some remodeling of the facility. And clearly, they thought it would be in their best interest to raise that issue now to see if the city council would enact an agreement that would remove that benchmark provision, keep the agreement the same original term, keep the formulas all the same, but basically take away that possibility that this thing would be revoked, particularly after you would put substantial dollars into this facility. Staff recommendation was to approve this. Economic Development Committee also had expressed a desire to recommend to council that it be approved. And I don't know if the district attorney wants to add to that, but that's a summary of this.
Mayor, just to add to that, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but actually while the revenue from the taxes did meet the benchmark, you said, and kind of dipped because of the markets dipping, there was actually a couple of years in there where their volume actually went up. It was the price of gas per gallon.
Each of the 3 years, he sold more gas than he did in 2014. And it's an easy thing to measure because, in effect, we charge 1 cent per gallon in motor fuel tax, so that's a local tax. And each of those 3 years was higher than 2014. So he sold more gas, but because of the benchmark in sales tax, that benchmark was not met.
So the agreement we have with him actually proved to be successful, not only keeping him afloat as a local business for 60 years, but actually increasing business by volume.
Correct.
Any other questions on that item? Moving on, Council Memo 16118, we have an incentive agreement with Joliet Bolt, Barge, and Rail. As you've noticed here, we're very fortunate that ARC is going to invest $21 million in capital improvements. The city did make a couple of requests of them to, or concessions to annex an additional 9 acres and to ensure that they use prevailing wage labor to undertake the project. In response, they did come back and request that permit fees in the amount or incentive in the amount of $212,500 be provided, a portion of which has already been paid. So this is the incentive agreement we're bringing to you for Joliet, Bolt, Barge, and Rail. Any questions on that? And then last, and I'll ask Mr. Jones once again, a resolution for the execution of an economic incentive agreement with West Jeff Auto Sales LLC or Joe Hawk LLC. Mr. Jones, would you comment on particulars on this incentive agreement?
Sure, thank you. And obviously, this is a continuation of the other items that are on the agenda for Hawk. As most of you know, we had a scare from Hawk. What was it, about a year ago or so? They announced the possibility of relocating, and when we could not find a location on Route 59, there was an option or a contract to purchase property in Plainfield. Fortunately, Art Van Furniture and the developer of this particular site pulled out of that agreement, and Hawk came back to that site as being one of their preferred sites. So we've been having discussions with Hawk for that time, and we got to the point where we negotiated an agreement that involves the relocation of both the Volkswagen dealership as well as the Mazda dealership from their current Jefferson Street locations up to Route 59. And it's not that every dealer just wants to pick up and move, go to a new site and build a facility. In effect, there's pressure from manufacturers. Once again, they feel that the location on Route 59 opens up the Plainfield-Naperville market more than what their current facilities will serve. And of course, when manufacturers tell dealers they need to do things differently and it increases the cost, typically dealers look to those communities for assistance through sales tax sharing. This is no different from what other communities are doing. In fact, we're happy because there have been overtures from at least one other community to both this dealer as well as other dealers that exist in our community. So it's one of those things where, you know, you hate to do it, but it's part of the way of keeping substantial sales tax dollars and revenues in town. The total development is estimated somewhere probably in the $11 million range in terms of that facility, which would be the 2 nameplates. There would also be a third parcel as part of this property that could accommodate another dealership. And we're told that the owner is working on that, and it would be a dealership that does not presently exist within Joliet. So it would be a relocation. It would be a new nameplate. The long and the short of the actual incentive here, it's a $3.5 million sales tax rebate over time. For the first 5 years, it's at a 70% sharing, with 70% going to the owner. Years 6 to 10, it goes down to 60%. In year 11, it's at 50% with subsequent years until the $3.5 million is paid out. There certainly is a requirement that they illustrate the actual expenses. You know, so if it's 9.6 million as opposed to 11, clearly they're over the 3.5 million and it becomes a valid payback. They also are, in this agreement, having building fees capped at 10,000. Doesn't include water connection fees, sewer connection fees, but basically capping those fees at 10,000. The downside of this is, well, I mean, the upside is we keep these 2 dealerships in town, so that goes without saying. But there is going to be, based on projections, there will probably be about a 10-year period where the city will actually get less sales tax from these 2 dealers under this agreement than we're getting now. And that's due to the fact that at this point, there is no sales tax sharing occurring with the Mazda dealership. And then on the Volkswagen side, they're currently at a 50% sales tax sharing agreement. With those higher percentages the first few years, we would basically be giving up more sales tax in this new development scenario than we do now. However, the projections are based upon pretty conservative sales projections. We know that this will open up those new Naperville Plainfield markets. If those sales exceed that, we could hit that break-even point much quicker. If that additional dealership comes into the mix, we'll hit it relatively quickly. So it's one of those things where this is pure business retention with a little bit of attraction, because we do get that 3rd dealership. There's a sort of a mini auto mall that exists, and I think that'll be very attractive to vehicle consumers. But we know we lost a dealer to Romeoville recently. We know that other towns are talking to our people. This is sort of the cost of doing business. And I hate to say it so bluntly, but in effect, car dealers all through Chicago, as they do these kind of developments, clearly they look to municipalities for cost sharing. And it's a rebate of what they generate. So this isn't something where money is coming out of the city's pocket. It's based on a percentage of what they generate. The petitioner's attorney is here, and certainly if I haven't covered anything, he could fill in some blanks.
Yeah, members of council, Mike Hansen. I do want to just reiterate and add a couple things to Mr. Jones' presentation. There will be a couple of proposed changes to this agreement before tomorrow night's council meeting. Number one is, as was intimated earlier by Mr. Jones, there's been discussion of another dealership coming to the north part of this parcel. This is about a 7.75 acre parcel. About 3.5 acres will be left to the north. John Crane is actively seeking right now. I can tell you that I know he's doing this. Another new franchise to the Joliet market. And the request is to also include a paragraph in the agreement that the same $3.5 million incentive will be given to that new dealer when, in fact, a new franchise does in fact go on that site. There were 2 other minor corrections to include that are in the agreement. Number one is we clarified the understanding of the $10,000 cap on the building fees, et cetera. That does exclude any connection fees to the sewer and water. Those are excluded. Those have to be paid by Hawk, which are always paid because of the city bond issue. And then there was another restrictive covenant in there that included a 45-mile provision, and our recommendation was to make that 20 miles. And Steve, I also have to clarify tomorrow the Joe Hawk. I will reiterate that aspect and see if Joe Hawk is to be included as a party. So those would be 3 changes that we would include in that agreement for tomorrow for consideration for the council.
And I would add to that when they first came in, I mean, this is at the point in time when we were very happy that the contract had come back to a Joliet location. We had talked about that additional sales tax sharing with this new dealer. And, you know, the way we looked at it is, you know, I could support this as ED director, but it didn't seem like it was something that was imminent. So it was kind of like, okay, if it comes to that, then we'll deal with it. I'm hoping that the optimism and the need to get in this agreement are indicative of the fact that we're close. So I'll leave it at that.
Quick question for Mike. You care to share with us what are the couple of types of brands that they're looking at?
Well, in fact, I don't know, so I can't share them. So okay. All I know is John Crane is working very diligently. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, we're into a section on some contract awards. In the interest of time, let me just mention that the Council Memo 16418 has been removed. This is the purchase of radio equipment, so that will not be up for consideration tomorrow. That leaves Council Memo 16518 on some GIS services, 16618. Once again, on some GIS professional services, 16718, vehicles for the public utilities, 16818, Ford F-450, 16918, utilities restoration program, and then 17018, award a contract for the demolition of 121 North Chicago Street. What I'd like to do is see if you have any questions on items 2 through 7 as listed on the agenda. If not, let me just mention there's one clarification tonight. I just want to mention on the demolition, and Marty, if you could help me on the demolition 121 North Chicago Street. We hope to get that demolition underway very quickly to have that building down prior to any festivals. There has been some questions asked about what will be the surface left there once the building is down. Is there any kind of final decision as part of this demolition as to what that surface will be where the building currently sits?
We're leaning towards crushed gravel, flat.
Okay. With that in mind, and then the last Council Memo 17218, professional services contract with Knight EA. This is change order number 10 for the Joliet Multimodal Regional Transportation Center. Any questions on that particular change order? If not, Madam City Clerk, that's everything we have listed for the City Council agenda for tomorrow night.
Next is public comments. Robert Webb.
Good evening, Councilman, administrative staff. Today I'm here speaking as the grantor, beneficiary, and authorized representative of the estate of Robert Ayufis Webb. Upon reflective thinking, this council will remember that some time ago I had tendered over a notice of tender for set-off to discharge municipal bill. And on that particular legal instrument, there was instructions that if those who had received it didn't understand it, that they should consult a federal judge, special prosecutor, or competent legal counsel to more or less explain to them the significance of that legal instrument. It also had in there that within 7 business days, that instrument hadn't been returned, pointing out any deficiencies that would be deemed that form of payment would be accepted. Well, that never happened. And subsequently issued another legal instrument, certificate of non-response, indicating that since that instrument instruction was not abided by, then that form of payment was deemed accepted. The form of payment took on the form of a money order for discharging that particular debt out of my TDA account that's in the Federal Reserve Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. It's the 6th district. I don't know if you all are familiar with the significance of the Social Security card that's issued by the Department of Social Security Administration. These numbers on the front represents the account number. The numbers on the back represents the tracking number of the account that's set up in this all high cap name, the legal person, Robert Ayufis Webb, Jr., to which after the passing of Resolution 192 by the U.S. Congress on June 5th, 1933, afforded citizens the right to discharge their debt, since you can't pay a bill with a bill, and a Federal Reserve note is a bill. So the money order that was provided along with that notice of tender for set-off indicated paid to the order of the U.S. Treasury, which is where this money comes from. Recently, I was sent a notice for termination of these municipal services with this big whopping bill on it. And I thought that was rather ironic because I got it on the 17th, and that was like 3 days prior to this status hearing before U.S. District Judge Kennelly tomorrow, and 30 days prior to this settlement conference before Magistrate Judge Maria Valdez. I think that was rather ironic that I get sent this notice in an attempt to seem to try to, shake me up or rattle me in some particular way. So I want to bring this to the attention of the council, first and foremost, put you in formal, awareness that it seems that there's some type of scheme afoot to interfere with my rights under House Joint Resolution 192. And if none of you all are familiar with it, I suggest that you get with either a U.S. attorney or somebody that's well-versed in the Uniform Commercial Codes or the United States Codes to be able to explain to you the significance of House Joint Resolution 192 that was adopted June 5th, 1933, which brought into play this card that's issued by the Department of Social Security Administration. Thereby, the government itself is liable for any debts that's incurred through the use of this number. And those who have this card are actually agents of the federal government, particularly the 14th Amendment.
Get the 4-minute mark to wrap it up, please.
So I suggest that this council take some decisive action, preferably today, because tomorrow, this issue will be brought to Judge Kennelly's attention to find out what his recommendations will be in terms of the move to interfere with my rights to exercise my rights under House Joint Resolution 192. And I suggest that you all take time to look it up to find out exactly where I'm coming from, and you'll be able to understand why any debts that's accumulated in this number is actually the debts of the principal, which is the government.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak under public comments? Mr. Hanson.
Member Mayor's of the Council, if I can just have two quick things. Number one, I don't know, Krista, if she got a hold of you today, but Heather Mills would like to come to the council tomorrow and just give the council, make a 2-minute presentation on the events that she has planned for this coming year. I know it's been an interest of the council to know what exactly are the Slammers going to be doing besides playing baseball, and she has a great array of interesting things to tell everybody about, and so if it's okay with you, she'll come and put a handout, et cetera. The other quick comment I'd like to make is I'm very glad Dave Mackley decided to stay to the end. I think as everybody knows, Dave is going to be retiring here at the end of the month. And I'd like to tell you on behalf of myself and all the many clients that I've been fortunate to represent, I can think of really no other finer city employee that I've worked with over all my 42 years than Dave Mackley. And as everybody knows, there's just been a ton of great people here working for the city. Dave has just shown incredible professionalism, great diligence, and he really understands what it means to, from a business point of view, to be fair and honest while still upholding the city ordinances and following them. If the answer was no, he let you know the answer was no and gave you a reason to do it. I know I'm going to miss Dave a lot, although I hope to be right behind him. I just think to publicly recognize Dave for and not to single him out over anybody else is just extremely appropriate. And I'd like to take a personal opportunity right now to say thanks, Dave, and good luck in your retirement. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Seeing none, I did have a request for closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session to discuss personnel, collective bargaining, land acquisition or conveyance, pending or threat litigation, after which the meeting will be adjourned?
Second.
Been motion and seconded to approve. Councilman Dickinson.
Aye.
Councilwoman Gavin. Absent, she left. Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Mudrin.
Aye.
Councilwoman Coleman.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Motion carried.